This is Red Ice Radio. From the dream to reality. RedIceCreations.com.
Welcome to Red Ice Radio. I hope you're doing well this September 11th, 2011. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Henrik Palmgren, and RedIceCreations.com is our website where you can read, listen, and see more. Dr. Judy D is a former professor of mechanical engineering with research interest in experimental stress analysis, structural mechanics, optical methods, and deformation analysis. And today we are again going to highlight her research on where did the towers go. We've had Judy with us once before in January this year, and we urge all who have not heard the story from the beginning to go back into our archive and listen to that program. This will get you up to speed, as we are today here going to proceed to talk about directed energy weapons and how the buildings were pulverized 10 years ago. Well, here we are 10 years later, a decade, and now, of course, as the different levels of spin, the official story, and then you have the more popular unofficial stories beginning to circle again. We've chosen to, once again, give focus to your work, Judy Wood. Welcome back once more then to Red Ice Radio. It's good to have you with us again, Judy.
Well, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely, you bet. So what's your take on all this then? I mean, has the dust from the rubble of those two buildings that was pulverized settled enough yet for people to begin to look anew on some of your evidence, Judy, to that you bring to the table here? Or how is it now 10 years afterwards? I don't know how long you've been looking at this now. I guess it's pretty much from day one after 9/11, so you've been pretty much into it for about 10 years. Is that correct, Judy?
Yes. Not full-time at first, and I did it kind of quietly, or it just kept bothering me until I realized I needed to speak out and do something about it, because holding it in was driving me nuts, because you feel like you're on a foreign planet. Like, why don't people around me see this? And it feels uncomfortable. But it's a very interesting question that you bring up about what has changed. In this past 10 years, of course, the cover-up management I've become more familiar with and can see it more clearly, and how it works. You keep everything stirred up, keep all the balls juggled in the air, keep everyone in confusion for a certain length of time until they move on and history is written. And that's, I think, right where we are at that turning point. To, kind of keep it, there's so much stuff out there now, so many different, quote, theories that people have been promoting, that anyone questioning the events looks at this other garbage and just, wants to throw their hands up and walk away, which is kind of how it's designed. But there's another thing. I've been to the site in New York quite a few times, at different points since then in the past 10 years. And for a while, I could see why they weren't rebuilding. There was a problem with continuing fuming and other ongoing degradation issues. Bankers Trust, they just finally brought down to the ground, taking it apart this past February, 2011. That's incredible. Almost 10 years to the day.
And Bankers Trust, that's very, very close, obviously, on Liberty Street, right? That's where it on the square of Washington Street and Liberty Street, I think.
It was correct. It was sort of diagonally across from Tower 2 and Building 4, right on the south side of Liberty Street, and those two were on the north side. And it was infected with something. And after they repaired it, then they decided to start taking it apart. And it took them nearly 10 years. And Fiderman Hall, which was on the north side of Building 7, a similar thing, and they just got it down to the ground a little over a year ago. It was in December 2009, I guess. So a little more than the year before that, before the Bankers Trust one. So it's interesting to see, can they really start building on it? And I have my thoughts as to why they have the two footprints as memorial, because I think it would be pretty bad to build on that spot. But then how are they able to build on the other areas? It was an interesting sight when I was up there recently and seeing, after the buildings have started coming out of the ground. all of the buildings in these areas, Building 7, the Freedom Tower, whatever they want to call it, that's over where Building 6 had been. And then there's a building going up where Building 4 had been. They're all on stilts. The steel
Explain that.
The steel is encased in concrete.
Mm-hmm.
When you get rid of nuclear waste, don't they put it in a concrete tomb in the ground?
Yeah, some kind of sarcophagus, I think they call it, or something like that. Yeah.
It seems like that is what the bottom three or four floors of each of these buildings is like. Under the guise of saying it's terrorist proof.
Is this going to be the part that's later filled in, much like the tub kind of thing, or are we talking about things that are going to be above the ground level?
This is above ground. This is like 3 or 4 stories above ground,
right.
Where it's this, high rises they make out of steel. This is steel, but it's encased in concrete.
What function would that fill? Do you think? What purpose is that for them?
Protect the steel from degradation.
Interesting. And why would this be a possible effect? Why would things that potentially is touching the ground then why would that degrade quicker? Do you think?
You remember in the chapter 12, you're seeing this horrendous rust. It's sort of like the steel is kind of just coming apart.
Oh yeah, yep.
You wouldn't want that to happen.
And that could still happen, you're saying?
Very much. I think so. There's each trip I've been up there to visit, I've seen new steel structures that they look like they've been at the bottom of the ocean for 100 years.
Interesting.
Like when they were they've moved the path train entrance to quite a few places, and they have an air quality problem in there.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's also I'm very sensitive to air quality. My nose starts running in the back, and I feel like I'm getting sick. My throat, feels like it's swelling up. You feel like you have to cough up crud. That's if there's a contaminant in the air, and it's still there. I don't think it's. I can tell you like which blocks it is, kind of.
So in other words, the dust hasn't settled.
I don't think so. I think there's still some ongoing issues. From my walking around the streets there, I would say that I wouldn't want to work there. I probably shouldn't say this too much because somebody might come after me. But that's my honest thoughts.
Yeah.
There's something still going on there.
Lingering there. The question is, if we look at it from the point of view of directed energy weapons, obviously that you've been focusing on when it comes to the destruction of the towers, is this then an effect that still could be lingering in the area? Is it in some way geographically tied, do you think, or what's going on there?
Geographically, it's the same location. And what I had found in looking at the evidence, and I really like to just look at evidence and try not to jump very far from that, is the material breaks down finer and finer. It's just like, an object 1 inch in size. Imagine it now as 2 half-inch pieces. Then it's 4 1/4-inch pieces, and so forth. It just keeps breaking down and down. Finer. We're talking about on the size of DNA, and that's just floating around in the air. Like
nanoparticles, if you will, almost very, very, very
exactly.
Tiny, very small.
Exactly, and you inhale it. It goes right into the bloodstream because it's like 1/100th of the size of red blood cells.
Yeah.
So it goes in your lungs and right into the bloodstream.
And we did hear about the asbestos problem in the buildings, and no matter in that regard, then how they were brought down, this would obviously still be an ongoing problem. But potentially we're talking about something else here, and maybe not only asbestos. Maybe even those particles at this point are broken down into such a fine dust that it's your lungs basically are incapable of cleaning themselves from these very, very small particles.
Oh, it does. They don't get hung up in your lungs. That's the thing. Lungs can catch particles down to a certain size, but smaller things go through.
Okay. Yeah.
because oxygen does. You get down really small, and things get by the filters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I haven't really seen much evidence of the asbestos. According to the official record, when the North Tower was 40 stories tall, when they were building it, is when they decided that they couldn't be using asbestos, and then they retrofit, from there on down, and from that point on, built it with another material from there up, and the entire second tower was built with non-asbestos.
Okay.
But, that's the official story. But also in dust samples and that type of thing, I haven't seen anything that really convinces me that a significant amount of asbestos was there. I wonder if that's partly a cover story kind of planted out there for this other nanoparticles.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you, by the way, how far have they come in the Freedom Tower, or One World Trade Center as it's called now? Is it beginning to get up there? I mean, it's expected to be done around 2012, right?
Right. I think it could be done around that time. It's getting the outer finished surface is above like the third or fourth story, that weird, stilts it's on, and up above there, for like half the building, it's got the final outside. Remember when they were building the World Trade Center towers, it had this, the raw outside before they had the aluminum cladding on it. You could see the aluminum cladding coming up the sides, like following the progress of the steel structure. The center
core of the building, yeah.
Or even the outer columns. Before they had the aluminum cladding on them, this raw steel structure was ahead of that.
Yeah.
And you could see the decorative aluminum cladding following, a few stories down below that, or even more. And that's kind of what you have here. But it really is curious, this business of building it up on stilts.
I'll definitely take a look at that, and hopefully there are some recent photos of the area, Ground Zero and the Freedom Tower and all that. Obviously, more photos, more video. New York Times, I think, released audio records anew. There's a lot more material coming out in a kind of an anniversary like this. Have you been keeping up with any other material, Judy?
Yeah, I heard that recent story, and there's a lot of factual errors that someone told me that are in there. I haven't read the thing that carefully. It was, it just made me laugh, kind of, in a sad way. Because let's say it is true. Let's say they had these audio tapes transcribed 10 years after the event. Why? Who are they protecting? If this is incriminating evidence, who are they protecting? Why did they hide these things until now? That would be my first question. Why the timing? The timing is just too coincidental. That it's like giving the story a booster shot.
It's like the standard MO, I guess we could call it. It's on the anniversaries of the murder of JFK, you have similar things happening, and you have similar things happening on the anniversary of Apollo moon landings. You know what I mean? It seems to be that they hold on to certain material almost so that they can re-inject it at a later point. I don't know.
Well, you know that I was on Coast to Coast this past May?
That's right, yep.
The night of May 3rd and 4th. And I told my dad when it was finalized I was going on, this was Sunday night, we spoke from 10 to 10:30, and he's 89, so he was hoping he was going to be around to watch the story unfold. He didn't know how it would unfold. I said, well, get ready. He said, yep, something's going to happen. 30 minutes later, we heard that bin Laden was killed.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, I forgot.
The next morning, my dad emailed me and said, see, your book's dangerous. It got bin Laden killed again.
That's a good one. That's good. So in a way, it's getting out there a little bit more than Judy, right? It's the message is getting out there. People are interested. They want to listen, right? They want to hear about this stuff. Most of them, anyway.
Right, a lot of people do, but it's finding it through the forest. The few little trees in this big forest of nonsense, which becomes difficult. And most people don't have time. They want to be told their opinion, and they've been trained to do that through television. If it's not on TV, it's not real.
Yep.
And that gets really scary. We need to have a culture where people can think, or else we all become robots.
That's right, and that's what they want us to be, isn't that the truth? At the end of the day, we're sitting hearing the talking heads, and as I said, before, Judy, you also have the different levels of this. Of course, people are trapped, in a sense, on different belief systems, and this goes into different levels. As I mentioned, the official story, then you have the popular unofficial story, and from there it just goes up or down the scale, I guess, in one sense, right?
Right, and there's the only way to maintain independent thought is to maintain independent thought. So joining groups, you get into this group think, and it's very easy to be controlled because humans don't like to step outside the norm. Yeah,
that's what's so sad about it. It hinges on belief systems in most regards. And as you say, in many cases, it's about belonging to something which is kind of countercultural. Maybe it's an identification thing in that as well. A place to belong to, basically, or a belief to kind of adhere to. It's kind of sad in one way.
Here's an interesting thought. This group, engineers and architects. I'm not wanting to criticize them specifically, but just as this organization, we have supposedly engineers and architects who join this group, 1,500 or more of them, who say there's something wrong with the official story, but they go along blindly with whatever this group dictates, and chanting, "We need new investigation."
Mm-hmm.
Well, who does an investigation but engineers and architects? If this group is supposed to have any clout as to knowing what they're talking about, they should be able to know how to conduct an investigation.
Yep.
So there's a disconnect there.
Obviously, as your book is called, this is all about where did the towers go, basically, and this is the main point. This is something that we've talked with you before about on the program, and something we could also bring up again and re-emphasize. I think one thing that always is difficult to know as an outsider, specifically if you haven't been to New York, is to appreciate, or before 9/11, been to New York, appreciate the size of the buildings. Were you up there yourself? Did you take a look at the buildings before they came down?
Yes, I've been up there in 1975 and 76, right after they were built.
And do you have a memory of that? Still recall of how tall they were, how big the buildings were?
It was just huge things, just big boxes.
And so the obvious question is where they went, right? Where is the footprint of the buildings? Where did they go? And as we've discussed before, this is basically about them being turned into dust powder, basically. Why don't we talk a little bit about how far some of the dust spread? Don't know if you have that material close by or recall that, Judy, in terms of the... we're talking about, I think in one photo that I saw in your book, 36 kilometers approximately from the towers. Did it go further than that? Do you know how far it went?
They traced it going over Pennsylvania and down through Delaware, because it went really high up in that dust cloud, and it just was dissipating all over. It probably went all over the planet, actually. But it was... yeah, what do you call the footprint? that becomes a real question.
Mm-hmm.
There's, of course, you can see it ankle deep for quite some distance, but for it to travel that far, to be able to identify it specifically as being from the World Trade Center, is it had a unique set of qualities to it,
mm-hmm.
And it was identified like throughout New Jersey, New York, but mainly it went south and southwest. Like Pennsylvania, there was quite a lot of tracings. They could actually see the dust cloud over Pennsylvania, over across Maryland.
And how far is that approximately, would you say? Do you have a number?
100 miles, 150 miles, 200 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a distance.
Quite a distance. I remember that the satellite photo that many people have seen, obviously, as well, showing how the incredible, dust or what looks like smoke, obviously from space, but it's dust, obviously, spreading a huge amount, or very, very far, obviously. So if we compare it to some of the other buildings that we've looked at here, you compare it to one earthquake building that was part of an earthquake went down. You've compared it to the big dome. What's it called again? Jude, remind me of the dome.
The Seattle King Dome.
That's right. We have huge debris piles left from those buildings, and you would obviously expect something similar in this case, correct?
If a building fell down, well, in controlled demolitions, when they blow up a building intentionally, the dust cloud usually doesn't rise much beyond the highest point of the building. It may be a little bit, but not much, and then it settles down pretty quickly because it's coarse dust. For the Seattle King Dome, in the Seattle Times, they said that downtown was covered with dust, and dust filled the air for almost 20 minutes. 20 minutes is a very short amount of time.
Very short, yes.
And then this Pakistan earthquake that I compare it to was a parking garage or an apartment structure that pancaked down, and you have a stack of floors. And it had just happened before this picture was taken, and people were running all over the pile looking if anyone they knew they could save, and you didn't see any dust in the air. The picture is unbelievably crisp and clear. There's a little bit of dust here and there, but it fell right out of the air. Yeah.
Now, the sheer size of the buildings, would that have, if we follow the line of the official story here, would that have anything to do with it? A point of argumentation might be, well, I mean, they're so tall, so when you begin this pancake effect or whatever you should call that, these disintegrated the floors below them because more and more weight adds to it. Does that make sense? And if not, why so?
Well, of course it doesn't make sense, because if one floor just falls one floor height to smash into the next one, and it busts it up, that's as far as it's fallen. And if that's stacking up and riding down to the next one, it's not busted up. So if something busts up into dust on the way down, it can't be riding the pile down. So you don't have an accumulation of mass. Like this Pakistan earthquake, you see all the floors stacked up at the bottom.
Yep.
But if you have the thing busted up on the way down into dust clouds, the dust clouds cannot, because there's less mass, less mass per surface area, it tends to hang in the air more. So how can it ride the pile down? It's just going to hang in the air.
That's right. And the dust took to the skies as well, as we've seen in many of these photos as well. Very interesting. How was the wind? We can see the wind current obviously that day, but is there anything that would explain it otherwise? If you look at it from the official point of view again, Judy, that would make this rise up of the dust in this way?
It's about a 7 to 9 mile per hour breeze, which is a very light breeze.
Yep.
This was on the backside, or right parallel, I guess, that day to a hurricane. But outside of the edges of a hurricane, you get some wind moving around, but you don't get horrendous hurricane force winds. So that wouldn't explain it either. You just have to, it should be kind of wafting wherever it is, but why is it so fine? Why is it so fine that it easily goes up? When buildings fall down, here's a mental exercise. Throw a cinder block off the roof of the top of one of the towers, which just in your mind. When it crashes to the ground, the tip that hits the ground first, or the pavement, is going to make powder, crumple it up. But that's going to cushion the material right behind that, and so forth. So you're going to end up with fine powder, medium powder, small chunks, bigger chunks, and because it's going to get just busted up into a range of sizes. It's not going to all turn to powder. And what was measured in this dust, in the various dust samples, was an amazingly high amount of fine powder for the amount of mass.
And how, I don't know if there's a scale or a ratio here, but how fine was it, Judy? Can you say?
Less than 1/10 of a micron.
And if we put that in perspective of a, I don't know, particle, molecule, what have you, how big is it, do you think?
Oh, we'll get down, like I said, about the size of DNA. 8 microns is about the size of a red blood cell.
Wow.
And we're talking to less than 1/10 of a micron.
Yeah. So, again then, to reemphasize some of the points, Judy, and go over some of this again here, the how would this be explained? Because we're basically talking about disintegration of matter to some degree, maybe even the breaking up of the the molecules, or how can we what kind of terminology do we put on this, Judy?
Well, there's a particular picture that, well, I call it dustification, because that's defined as whatever it was that happened. Because what happened was something we'd never seen before. And a new phenomenon needs a new word to describe it. So it's been defined as dustification. But if you look at page 336, there's a fellow with a briefcase. It looks like he's had a rough day at the office. Worse than that, that's kind of an understatement. Coming home, and the clock in the background shows it's 10:14. It was at 9:59 when the South Tower turned to dust. It was 10:28, 10:29 when the North Tower turned to dust. So this is right between the two. So he's walking home. This is east of Broadway, just barely east of Broadway. And you look, and you have very, very fine dust around his feet. But you can see his face and his shoulders clearly.
Mm.
That shows whatever it was settled out of the air.
Mm.
That dust around his feet could not have settled out of the air that fast. So it landed as coarse dust and then became fine dust.
So the process continued, that's what you're saying?
Yes,
yeah.
And there's other pictures too. I call it the fuzzball intersection. I think it's the first page of that chapter, that where you're upwind about a block of the North Tower, and you see in the background blue sky, clear blue sky. Then you notice around the feet of people these fuzzballs, and then pretty soon you notice the stuff just lifting all on its own, not even need to be kicked up. And how does it settle to the ground if it's rising on its own?
Yeah.
Unless it broke down. Another way of seeing this is if you get a handful of rocks and throw them, they're going to go a certain distance. What happens if they turn into flour? The consistency of flour, like baking flour,
mm-hmm.
It's not going to go very far.
That's right.
So let's say these rocks that you throw become, break down into flour along that trajectory. They're going to come to a certain point after they've broken down to a certain amount where they stop traveling horizontally.
Yeah, interesting analogy. So that means that the process of that begun wasn't finished by the time the towers were gone, pretty much. How long do you think that this was ongoing? In a way, what you hinted to earlier is that this process might have lingered for a long, long time, and even actually being possibly then related to what you're talking about, the buildings today there being on these stilts, correct?
Right, possibly. That's just a question of, is that why they put them up on stilts?
Mm.
But knowing that they took down Banker's Trust after they repaired it, and when they started taking it down, the area where they had repaired it was just super, super rusty. It wouldn't explain, it's bizarre how it could indoors be that rusty.
Yeah.
If you look at the top of page 313, you see where the clouds just stopped rolling out and started going up. It's like rising yeast bread. And when the South Tower turned to dust, the dust cloud rolled out a certain distance. You can see on the top page 312. Rolled out a certain distance. Then when the North Tower turned to dust, it rolled out about a block further before it went up. And the towers are about a block apart. So they seem to have rolled out the same distance before going up.
Interesting. So that would basically, what that means is that the process of the disintegration happened first, and then the further out they came, basically this process continued. And I guess, do you know if this is basically a residue effect of the particles themselves, that let's say that they were, in some way they interacted with an energy source, and basically that begun a disintegration process, which made them, basically flow out carrying with the wind pretty much, and then that process of disintegration continued? Or do you think that they hit another level, I guess, of that energy that broke them up further?
I think it started a process that was not self-quenching. In other words, this unraveling. And it's my understanding that with the first nuclear bomb test, the scientists did not know if it would be self-quenching or if the reaction would continue and destroy the planet.
That's right, yeah.
And yet the ones who decided to go ahead with the test took that gamble.
That's just amazing when you think about that, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess there wouldn't be anyone left to, hold them accountable.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And this, I wonder if, whoever planned this had the same kind of mentality. They didn't know if it would be self-quenching or not. And it's sort of slowed down over time. The process is great, but it definitely didn't stop. And this is, a lot of similarities with the Hutchison effect. And in John Hutchison's experience, he's found stuff that continues onward. Like he had a steel file that broke apart, and he turned the gizmo off. And the next day he came back, and the thing had degraded more and crumbled.
Yeah.
So it's like it affects it, and it continues like a snowball effect or a chain reaction.
That's right. It's one might think at first then that this is a very precise technique, but as you've showed in your book, Judy, this is something that apparently, potentially we say, because we don't know about the motive, at least I don't, and exactly what the goal was in terms of the destruction. Because we can see the kind of a Swiss cheese effect, if you will, in WTC 6, among other buildings. There's what I'm saying is that it might not have been that exactly precise. They might not have done so many tests, so to speak, beforehand, correct?
I think that Building 6 was part of the design, and same with Building 3. Those buildings were reduced in mass by, at least 50% of the mass from Building 6 was taken out. Mm-hmm. That leaves a much smaller chunk of building. It was a 6-story building. No, I'm sorry, an 8-story building. And if you take out that middle part, you have like 2 side buildings, small buildings, like a quarter of the size of the whole thing. And the smallest piece that was the furthest west was adjacent to the bathtub wall. And if you look at where that was, you'll see why it would be very beneficial to, like page 49, that chunk that was right up in that corner of the bathtub, when they took it down, they couldn't use bombs, dynamite or whatever to bring it down. They had to use cables to pull it down because they're afraid of damaging the bathtub wall. Yeah, that's right. And if they would have done that, there would have been water rushing in at that point from the Hudson, correct? Right. If you realize that the towers were built in the Hudson River, they were built on bedrock that was 70 feet below the water table. Mm-hmm. So they built this dike around and up to the old shoreline to keep the bathtub. They call it the bathtub to keep the lower stories, the 70 feet below the water table, dry and like land. Yep. They're living below the water line. So if you drop the towers on it, you for sure break up the bathtub. Would have damaged. They're worried about. Yeah, they're worried about dropping just a 6-story piece of building on it, and the other piece that remained was just the south corner of Building 3. But the rest of Building 3 turned to dust, and it's right adjacent to the bathtub wall. Mm. That's interesting. So that, in that sense, that might have been very precise. Is that what you're saying then? Very precise, yep. Mm. And Building 3 is interesting. About half of it was turned to dust during the destruction of Tower 2, and the rest of it during Tower 1. In 2 stages.
See, I'm looking at the map as well that you have in the book, Judy, and why don't we talk a little bit over here, maybe this is a good point or a good place to do this, about Building 7 then, and your take on that. Give us your version of that, because we hear about the comments about the decision to pull that building, and we see it come down and so forth. What's your take on 7?
Well, it's not really a take on it. Again, you look at the evidence, and there's little to no seismic signature associated with that building. If you drop a building that size to the ground, it's going to leave a large seismic signal. And the MANY station, this is on page 87, the MANY station, you could not pick it out of background noise. As far as you knew, nothing happened. It was a non-event. And in the other stations, maybe you see a slightly higher frequency, but you can't be sure that what was happening, what caused that. Mm. And what was also peculiar, if you slam a building down to the ground, down to bedrock, it should be like hitting a tuning fork and send some signal ringing over to the seismic station through the ground. Mm. There's no primary wave or secondary wave associated with the demise of these buildings. Only surface waves.
That's interesting.
So if you slam the buildings down to bedrock, it's like hitting a tuning fork.
What would you you have a little comparison chart? Where do you think you would place a building coming down of the size of World Trade Center 1 and 2 on the Richter scale, Judy?
Well, just noting what size ones there have been, it'd be for towers 1 and 2 somewhere between a 3.2 and a 3.7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Depends on how you do the comparison. And for Building 7, you should get somewhere between a 2.8 and a 2.9.
Interesting. And what do we have for Building 1 and 2, Judy?
For Tower 2, that was the first one that went. It was a 2.1, and Tower 1, it was a 2.3. Tower 1 is 30 times. That's 3 times 10. 30 times the potential energy of the King Dome. Mm-hmm. It's a bigger building, more mass, high above the ground. The King Dome was a 2.3. Building 7 was a 0.6.
Yeah, that's nothing. Yeah.
It's you kind of wonder if that was there was like it was a windowsill that fell on the ground. A little bit of an exaggeration, but not by much. The other interesting things is the time it took. If you go to page 67, on the bottom seismic line, you'll see event 5 next to event 17. Mm. Event 5 is a vertical line through the chart just to show where it is. That was the demise of Building 7. There's nothing there. Mm. There was an earthquake in the Fox Islands. That was event 17. You see something there. And up above, you see events 11, 12, 13, and so forth. Those were quarry blasts over New Jersey and beyond. Much further away.
Yeah.
And they were registered. They're just, stick of dynamite in a quarry. Well, probably a little bit more than a stick of dynamite, but something like that. They were quarry blasts. And so what happened with Building 7, it was less than those quarry blasts, or even it didn't even register. So you start wondering if anything hit the ground. This is evidence. If you blow up a building, if you cut up the columns, however you take the building down, if that mass slams to the ground, you should have a seismic signal.
Yeah.
What this shows is that the mass did not slam to the ground. The building didn't burn up, nor did it slam to the ground, but turned into dust in midair. Dust doesn't make a thud when it hits.
And what do you think if there's a 2.1 from World Trade Center 2, and I think a 2.3 from World Trade Center 1, what would you attribute to that? Is that things on the bottom falling off or down? Because as we see, certain things have fallen into, World Trade Center 5, I think, and some things hit other buildings around. That's basically what I'm saying.
Not much. What happened to Building 5, those are cylindrical holes. Things falling on it wouldn't leave cylindrical holes that are empty, with nothing in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the middle of Building 6. Nothing can make a hole that shape and leave nothing behind. Mm-hmm. But if you, just for comparison, let's say you turn the top 90 stories of Building 1 into dust, blows away at the breeze. So you're only left with the bottom 20 stories, and drop that to the ground. You get approximately a 2.3 on the Richter scale.
And so is that pretty close to the scenario, do you think, of what happened?
It's not exact, where the cutoff is, but if you look around, like across the street, the Winter Garden, and WFC2 and WFC3, I call them stab wounds, with the beam going through the building.
Right.
You don't have any stab wounds really above the 18th floor. If you have a 110-story building coming apart, why don't you have chunks of steel stabbing other buildings above the 18th floor?
Yeah.
And there's only a few of them. It is also, if you for building, for Tower 2, it's like 16 floors. That would make a 2.1, approximately. So this also supports the idea of a building turning to dust. And if you look at the duration of the seismic signals, the building shook for building Tower 1, the ground shook for about 8 seconds. It takes like 9.5 seconds to throw a bowling ball off the roof and have it hit the pavement.
Yep.
So there wasn't enough time, even with no resistance, for the building to fall to the ground. It couldn't have fallen and hit the ground. The ground would shake if you're hammering something like a jackhammer of pancaking, if it's sitting on bedrock going kaboomity boomity boomity boom down, floor by floor breaking up, well, it's going to be a whole lot longer than 20 seconds or so, or 30 seconds. It's going to be at least 100 seconds. But because it takes time to break stuff. But 8 seconds, again, that doesn't even account for something falling off the roof.
In free fall speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's consistent with, again, the top 90 stories or so turning into dust.
So we do have potentially a little bit from the bottom floors, and that potentially then could be attributed that the main, how should we put this, the core, the center focus, if you will, of the energy weapon that was used was directed towards the top portion, if you will, of the buildings, correct?
Not necessarily. Not
Okay.
necessarily. There's other scenarios that you can see. This is again an interference effect. It's not like a laser beam from outer space, as so many of my detractors like to present it as.
Right.
It's not that type of energy weapon. It's a field effect. Imagine if you have a piece of glass with metal filings on it, you run a magnet underneath it. You can see the magnetic field shaped by the metal filings.
Yep.
Let's say you have something else, you're going to interfere with that magnetic field. It would interfere in that zone, but it wouldn't be where the magnet was, where it was directed from. It's like two different signals superimposed on each other in a volume of space. Another example I like to give is, and this is a little bit simplified, a cell phone. Your cell phone doesn't work all by itself. You need a cell phone tower to transmit the signal, to get the signal from your phone to send it elsewhere.
That's correct.
And you also need batteries in your cell phone. So let's say you have a cell phone with working batteries, but you're not in the range of a cell phone tower. No go. If you have a cell phone tower but not a working cell phone, it doesn't work. But the cell phone works within this range of the tower. You don't care what tower you're in range of. You just need one, that works, that's in that range. And sometimes you go around a corner, or if you're driving down a road, you go around a turn, and it doesn't work because that isn't covered, that area. So if you have the cell phone range, the tower with the signal the tower can deal with is one thing, and then where the cell phone is within that means you get to have a conversation. So we have like an overall field, and then within that, something else that causes the destruction in a particular place.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a single item shooting from a single place. It's an effect within a region of space.
That's right. So this interference pattern, this could basically, what we're seeing in building 5 and 6 with these weird kind of holes in them, and certain other aspect that you've detailed about the circular holes in some of the windows and so forth. This might be a little imprint of that, or a signature of that, if you will.
Yes, John Hutchison's samples was much smaller scale. It's like something tunnels in a particular direction along a line, and then at a radial distance away from that line, it destroys material. So he has this solid aluminum bar. There's pictures of it in the book, where one of these tunnels is just, it's like it's drilling in space through this aluminum bar in the middle. But you can't stick your drill, in and bend it around a corner and get to that area. It's just that it travels in space and then destroys things in a cylindrical pattern. And the holes in Building 6 look like they're about 24 feet in diameter. Kind of look like that. It's tempting to think it came from above. It would seem like a possibility, but also what I've gotten to know about this weird interaction is along a line, it destroys in a radial direction. Mm-hmm. So you could have one of these lines, going into Building 5 or 6 that do this kind of thing. Just looking at the pattern of destruction that it does.
Do you think that the pattern is predictable? Can it be, you think, measured, or there was an anticipation maybe that it would also create damage into these buildings, do you think?
Yeah, I think they kind of wanted to get rid of some of 4 and 5. Maybe they wanted more, maybe they wanted less. Remember the corner of Building 4 that went missing? That's at the corner of Liberty and Church. That's also near a bathtub wall. It was kind of interesting, and this pattern, but we don't know for sure why, but there is a pattern that of this destruction. Also, with the toasted cars, that as much as a half mile away, cars were seen going into spontaneous combustion. One of the weird stories that came out the past few days, there was some BBC show apparently where somebody was an emergency first responder was driving someplace with his family and came upon a car that went into spontaneous combustion, went to help people, and he died in the event.
Really? Yeah.
And
more of these stories are coming out.
Right, I'd heard that one before, but I don't know much more about it. But the ones that I am familiar with are ones in Lower Manhattan, like Ellen Cook, the first responder who was over by the seaport, over by the FDR Drive, saw a car go into spontaneous combustion. He was trying to rationalize it because, this is weird. You got to explain it in your own mind. What happened? Mm-hmm. And you're assessing it. And so he came up with a story that he thought, well, maybe a fireball rolled down the street from the World Trade Center and got to this car. It's the best he could do. But to see a car a half mile away going into spontaneous combustion is peculiar.
Oh, yeah. And this is such a massive, traumatizing, obviously, event as well, Judy, that these are I'm saying the way the human mind works is that you might be able afterwards in a situation you try to make sense of it all, but certain things are maybe even you kind of push them into the corner of your mind, if you know what I mean. So we don't even know, many of these stories might not even have been reported on. There might be tons more, but people simply haven't been able to make sense of it, and therefore chosen not to talk about it. Correct?
Right, because who'd believe them? I mean, they don't want to be locked up in the loony bin.
That's right. Yeah.
Here's another example: the steel-toed boots. People are given an answer and they run with it. They don't stop to think if it makes sense. And a lot of those stories got started that way, like steel-toed boots melting after a couple of hours on the pile because it's so hot.
Yeah.
As I often say, if my oven, the steel oven is melting, the turkey inside is more than well done.
That's right.
But there's no reports of burned feet and burned bones, and legs getting burned off,
Yeah.
or equipment not functioning. But with the number of stories like that, they are observing something. It clearly isn't what they thought it was, or what they rationalized it as, but something was happening, like the spontaneous combustion of the cars. And of the cars they carted away, the ones where there was enough to cart away, there was 1,400 is the number given.
What happened with these cars? Where did they go? Are they destroyed, all of them today, do you think?
There's a few of them that have been saved. Some of the ambulances and, I think a fire truck or something here or there.
Mm.
They pick particular ones. But there's something I had noticed about West Broadway. I called that the swamp because it looked like it with all the fire hoses and wet paper and gunk. It looked like a swamp down the street. But every vehicle for about 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center complex, from Building 7 on north, was toasted. What I mean by toasted, not necessarily burned, but it's toast. It's history. You can't repair it. You got to get another one. Something happened to it. And all of it kind of looks like it's burned, but you don't know what happened to it. Mm. All the way, every single one of them up in some part of them, maybe all of them, maybe part of them, was toasted. No buildings on the side were toasted. No signposts were toasted. No trees, bushy trees overhanging the streets were toasted. Paper was unburned. You don't see any bonfires of paper anywhere. So you start looking at what the connections are. Signposts are potted in the ground. Mm. They're grounded. Cars are up on rubber tires. They're not grounded. Okay, now look at the towers. The towers, the real tall part of the towers, it's a long way from grounding. Let's say if you're going to build up a charge in something that can't get out fast enough, that might happen in the upper part, but not right at the ground. Hmm. So I'm wondering if that has something to do with why they only go down to the ground, but not below the ground. And especially the outer columns that are left at the bottom. They're about, the lobby size outer wheat checks.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Those are very well grounded. So I wonder if that's why they remained, and the rest of the stuff that wasn't tacked down to them did not.
Well, that's an interesting take on that. And so this thing with the cars there, possibly explain it in that way, that the energy had nowhere to go since they were on the rubber tires. So basically, that means that if they would have been touching the earth, the ground, the energy would have been discharged, if you will, this way. But since they weren't, this potentially explain, like one witness said, Michael D'Angelo, I remember his story. He said that the car started to, pop off, basically, or going off, cooking off, I think was what the term he used. And so this would be focused around the engine part as well, where there is more metal. Is that correct?
Perhaps. This is just looking at the patterns, the trends of things. Mm. It might be indeed be there's something about the engines, and maybe the engines are also wired in more with the rest of the car.
Yeah.
Because when you ground something out, you ground it to the engine.
Ah.
There's a lot of interesting things there. That wax spot car, it looks like it has a new wax job in the back end and pristine back end, but toasted front end. Mm. The door is where there's an abrupt change. Don't they have rubber gaskets around the doors?
I believe they do.
And there's things like that I start wondering about. Like there's another one where the back end is toasted, but not the rest. It stops right around the door seal. Mm.
So obviously different effects on different types of material. Metal or iron would react in one way to a, at the end of the day, a frequency, a particular energy, while concrete would have a different effect, or it would, break up differently, basically.
Right. Like what I noticed with the cars, the door latches and like the trunk latches were the first to go. And you have, partly toasted car, but the trunk lids popped and the doors popped.
Mm.
You could say, okay, the person was bailing out, but the trunk lid being popped, there's an awful lot of them with pop trunk lids.
Interesting. I want to ask you one more thing here, and then we can wrap things up with the first segment here, Judy. Do you believe that this was a new weapons test? And a continuation from that question is, have you seen any other evidence of a similar type of directed energy weapon elsewhere in the world?
That ties right into what I was saying about popped trunk lids. It's a pretty weird thing to see, so many trunk lids open. Like if somebody's car's on fire, they don't stop and open their trunk lid before they run. There's at Oklahoma City, there was a bunch of toasted cars with popped trunk lids, missing door handles. It's pretty strange. I remember a baby blue Cadillac with a fire on the side of it. Nowhere else, just the outside on the metal on the outside. That was strange. Also, the cylindrical cutouts that we saw in Building 6, vertically, straight down, cylindrical cutouts in the building, that was also seen in the Mirror Building in Oklahoma City.
Mm.
I've not looked into that in great depth, but it does cause a question as to why you have cylindrically cut out buildings from top to bottom if you have an explosion in the street.
Yeah.
And the scalloped line around the remaining roof was pretty peculiar. And you have the fuming cars, toasted cars a block away. It's pretty bizarre. It's
very bizarre indeed. And Judy, we're going to continue talking more about this here in our next segment. The first one has gone by really quick, so I'm looking forward to continuing and asking you about other of the anomalies, obviously. But let's talk a little bit about the websites first. And obviously the book title again is Where Did the Towers Go? And people can go to the website with the same name, wheredidthetowersgo.com, to get a copy of the book. And I highly recommend it, having it in your hand and going through at your own pace the photos, the equations, and the writing that you have in the book, Jude. It's very, very interesting. Recommended reading for everyone that want to know more about 9/11, obviously. Then you have your own website, Dr. Judy Wood, drjudywood.com as well, where you also have a lot of this material compiled, obviously, things that you've gathered over the years, Judy. Is there something you want to mention about the websites here before we wrap things up?
Yeah, my main website was like a file cabinet, just storing the material there, because I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase, dead people keep secrets.
That's right. Yeah.
I didn't want to be one of those, so I didn't want to keep secrets, so I put the images out there while I was writing the book. A lot of the images are there. They're not the best organization, but that's why. They were just there while I was writing the book.
That's right. It's there as a reference archive, and then you've done a great job in compiling all of this data into the book, basically, correct?
Yes.